Welcome to the Enneagram in a Movie podcast, part of the Awareness to Action podcast network. I'm TJ Dawe, and this season my co-host Mario Sikora and I will be exploring the Enneagram through the lens of specific directors whose work demonstrates themes related to the 9 Enneagram types and 3 instinctual biases. If you like what you hear, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. In the meantime, make some popcorn, sit back, and enjoy the show. So the Royal Tenenbaums came out in 2001. It was a Christmas release up against Fellowship of the Ring and a number of other very successful films, and it really cemented Wes Anderson as a voice people were interested in. So it's the story of the Tenenbaum family, who are a family of geniuses. And Wes Anderson said in an interview he originally conceived the movie as an exploration of what it would be like an exploration of geniuses, and as he worked on it, it ended up being an exploration more of family. So the Tenenbaums live in a big house in Brooklyn. That's where most of the movie takes place. It's a very central set piece, which gets back to what we were talking about him being a preserving for. We really explore this house in detail. And the walls are all painted vivid colors, and there's rich wood, and it's a big house, and there's brick on the outside, and it's iron fencing, and it's very elaborate. It's the kind of house that is catnip to any preserving type, particularly a preserving for.
I think this is where Wes Anderson really finds his aesthetic vision in this movie, right?
Yeah.
It was there in Rushmore, but it wasn't as clearly defined as it is in the Royal Tenenbaums, I felt.
Well, he had more control over the environment.
Yes.
So, Rushmore had been enough of a success that he was given a bigger budget and just more ability to explore and just take things further. I think he was also just developing more confidence as an artist. It was his third film, so you can see this ascent if you watch his movies in chronological order of Bottle Rocket and then Rushmore. We didn't have as big of a budget, he didn't have as much control, and then Royal Tenenbaums, he really came into his own in a number of ways, that being one of them.
Yeah.
So the patriarch of the family is named Royal Tenenbaum, played by Gene Hackman. He's a lawyer, and he left the family decades before and has been living in a hotel. He was disbarred and is broke and is about to be booted from the hotel. The matriarch is played by Angelica Houston. The character's name is Etheline, often called Ethel, and she's an archaeologist as well as a bridge teacher. Her accountant is Henry Sherman, played by Danny Glover, who proposes to Ethel near the beginning of the movie. They have 3 adult children who all live away from home and then all return home for various reasons. So Ben Stiller plays the eldest, Chaz, who's a business genius who became rich and famous for his wealth as, I think, a 10-year-old. It's never quite clear how old the kids are in that early scene in the movie where it shows what they were like when they were a kid. Yeah, he bred Dalmatian mice, and then he also bought property, and it was him that got his father disbarred. So he was wearing a suit. He had his own rotating rack of identical ties, and he would wear a different one every day, and he took it very seriously. And Gwyneth Paltrow is Margot, the adopted middle child. She's a playwright who achieved a lot of success as a playwright. She's married to Bill Murray's character, Raleigh Sinclair, who's a famous neurologist. I think every character other than Gene Hackman's character in this movie has written a book or written multiple books. That's something that comes up again and again. And the framing device of this is a book called The Royal Tenenbaums, which seems to be a novel. It's narrated by Alec Baldwin. So every segment opens with a new chapter of the book. We see that page, the opening page of that chapter. We can read the first sentence, which sets up what we're about to see. So the implication is that there's a book written about the Tenenbaums, probably fictional, and the author is telling us this story. So yet again, we've got that theme of the meta level of the movie. You're being reminded that somebody is telling you this story in a really particular way. Luke Wilson plays Richie, who's a former world tennis champion, whose career just fell to pieces when he had a meltdown, which we find out later the reason why that happened, and he's been traveling the world on a ship ever since. And Owen Wilson plays Eli, who's a neighbor, who's a successful novelist of Westerns, and who's having a secret affair with Margot and is also increasingly spiraling into oblivion drug addict. So Royal, to find someplace to live, fakes having cancer in order to lie his way back into the family home, just to give him some time to get back on his feet. And while he's there, he re-engages with his family. And my guess about him is that he's an 8. He really does like having control. He wants to feel powerful. He likes being the patriarch of the family, but he's been absent from them for a long time. So he starts interacting with them in really vivid ways. The story, the pretense of having cancer just explodes, and he's booted out. And without going into detail, I'm sure we'll get into this, but eventually the family works through their differences and they do come back together as a family. So it's a huge ensemble. There's a big cast, and there's significant actors in every role. Every role is important. Everybody has a thing. Everybody has an area of expertise. Everybody has written a book. Everybody's book has been successful. They all have their own particular things, and they're all messed up in their own particular ways.
Yes.
And circumstances, like I said, conspire to move them all into the same house, which is a big part of why the whole movie, not the whole movie, but a lot of the movie takes place in that one environment that we explore pretty thoroughly, which is a real house. It wasn't done on a soundstage.
Oh, really? Oh, I see that. I didn't know. Interesting. Yeah. So about the actors, you're absolutely right. There were some, Danny Glover, Angelica Houston, Gene Hackman, Ben Stiller, others. Also, we're starting to see the repetition of some of the character actors, such as Pagoda, right? The guy, let's see if I can find his name right here. A guy named Kumar Palana, who I doubt he's an actor, right? I don't know where that guy came from, right? But he was in Rushmore. I think he played the groundskeeper, and he's back as the butler slash assistant, whatever he is in this movie, and spy for Royal, who's he's been spying on the family for Royal all along. This movie reinforced me watching it again what an amazing actor Gene Hackman is, right? I mean, we saw him last time in Unforgiven, and he gave in one of his best performances there. But rewatching the Royal Tenenbaums, I was just in awe of Gene Hackman as an actor in this. He was able to, he's an awful person, right? He's lying about about having cancer, right? He's clearly racist, right? I mean, his relationship, with Danny Glover, some of the comments to him, it's like, oh my goodness, and which kind of brings up a theme of uncomfortable themes in Wes Anderson movies that I don't know could be made today. Right. With, some of the things that he says to the Danny Glover character, I don't think, like, are you talking to me, Coltrane sort of thing? It's like, yeah, you want to jive out, and so it's like, right. So he's an unlikable, I mean, on paper, at least, profoundly unlikable human being. His relationship with his adopted daughter is terrible, right? I mean, she puts on a play when she's a child, and, and it's with, characters dressed up as animals. And afterwards she says to him, so what did you think? And he said, yeah, it was okay. I don't think the characters were fully developed.
I didn't find it believable. He hands his 11-year-old daughter's play that she staged on her birthday.
Yes.
And in a beautifully four-ish moment, because I believe Margot really is almost a caricature of a four.
Oh, my goodness.
Played by Gwyneth Paltrow. So as he just brutally pans her creative effort on her 11th birthday, she gets up and walks away while everybody is singing happy birthday and looks back twice, glaring. Just completely hurt. Another element to that is she's adopted, and they mention that he always mentions that this is Margot, my adopted daughter. So let's just remind you that you're not really one of this family, and that she disappeared for a couple of weeks when she was 14 to find her biological family. And when she came back, she was missing half of a finger. So we find out later that happened when she did find her family, and it just happened with an accident when the father of that family was chopping wood and chopped off part of her finger, so that finger was replaced with a wooden prosthetic, which at one point you can hear her tapping, I think, against the edge of a bathtub as this constant reminder of, I'm wounded, I'm different, I'm maimed.
Yes. And when somebody asks her, did you try to sew the finger back on? She says, wasn't worth it. Yeah, the absolute stereotype of the wounded, dark, brooding four. She had secrets. She would disappear. Nobody knew where she went. She was married at one point that nobody knew about. She'd been a lifelong smoker and nobody knew, and all these things that were just mysterious and dark and secret about her.
She's always sullen. She's wearing dark eye makeup. She's a playwright. She's a successful playwright at that. And in the resolution of the movie, you see that she's written her newest play after a long absence, because that's part of her character at the beginning of the movie. She hasn't written a play in 7 years. But then she writes a new play, and it includes the line where a father says, this is my adopted daughter. And of course, Royal and the audience is delighted by that. And something that I just thought was wonderful is in the narration, it said, the play ran for 2 weeks to mixed reviews. So instead of giving her a big victory at the end by writing this triumph that everybody loves about her dysfunctional family, It's actually a failure.
Yeah. and I think on this, Alec Baldwin was the perfect narrator for this. I mean, it's one of those things where you think, oh, anybody could have done that. But boy, who would you have placed in that? Or can you think of anybody you would have placed in that role who would have narrated and been a more pitch perfect narrator for the tone of this movie? I thought that was really inspired casting.
Can't imagine anyone better. But yes, as you were saying, Royal is a pretty despicable character, but his arc throughout is that he's eventually redeemed. And one of the moments that hit me in the heart, the very first time I saw this in the theater, when I initially didn't like it, which I now wonder what I was thinking, because I just love it now. But there's a moment after his pretense of having had cancer has exploded, when just about as he's about to leave, he turns and says to the family, these last 6 days of interacting with all of you have probably been the best 6 days of my life. And Alec Baldwin, as the narrator, comes in and says, as soon as Royal said these words, he realized they were true. And that just really melted my heart to hear that. Here's this big, loud, deceitful, racist, absent father for decades, insensitive, brutal, unaware of the name of his son Chaz's dead wife. Like, it's just a checklist of every bad thing a father can be. And then you see him just melt with love and engagement with his kids and with his grandkids. Yes. And then he turns around completely, which again, I think gets back to something we were talking about with Rushmore, is in some ways, this movie is like a fantasy created by a four of, what if my awful, insensitive, absent father were to come back and apologize for what a shit he's been my entire life? Yes. What if he was to suddenly be supportive and kind and generous and say the exact things that you would want a good father to say?
And do it because he finally realized how wonderful I am. Right. And not just because, life changed him or anything like that, but he was finally able to see how special I am and how deserving of love I am. Right. I agree. You're a tremendously tender moment. And again, we have this idea of, it's a comedy, yet with some real darkness. I mean, the Luke Wilson, the Balmer, the brother who was the tennis champion, tries to commit suicide because he realizes that he is, in love with his, or he knew he was in love with his adopted sister, but I think it occurred to him that this love will never, be requited, that it's not to be. And so he's standing there in front of the mirror and he says, I'm going to kill myself tomorrow. I think he says, I'm going to kill myself tomorrow, but then slices his wrists at that moment.
Right away. Yeah. And this is after shaving his head and shaving his beard. The whole scene is set to the music of Elliott Smith, the song Needle in the Hay. And Elliott Smith, I'm quite certain, is a four himself, who took his own life a couple of years after this movie came out in a particularly brutal way. He stabbed himself in the heart with glass.
Oh my gosh.
His music, his entire body of music, is suffused with fourish melancholy and uniqueness. He was an incredible songwriter and guitar player, and sometimes played in his own tunings. And his music is incredibly sad. He was Oscar nominated for a song that he did for Good Will Hunting. I think 3 of his songs were used in that. So yeah, it's an incredibly affecting sequence in Royal Tenenbaums. And it's not just that he realizes his unrequited love will never be requited, but that she's been having an affair with Eli, the family friend, under his nose the entire time. And there's nothing he can do about it.
Yes. Fortunately, he survives, okay, and ends up, kind of coming to some resolution about the whole situation. And, there is this sort of healing that happens. Even the Ben Stiller character, the son who is the most hostile toward Royal, very, very aggressive, very, very angry, comes around to accepting him, and in fact is riding on the back of the trash truck at the end of the movie, kind of this joyful celebration of togetherness. On music, lots of fourish music through it. There's the Nico cover of Jackson Browne's These Days, which is just the most melancholic fourish song I may have ever heard. Right, music is a big thing in his movies. Right, Rushmore was all British invasion songs that were kind of, quirky and unusual. Yes, deep cuts, absolutely, and as were the songs in this movie, right? I mean, These Days is a song that some people might know, but most people won't be familiar with the Nico cover of it, right? Nico, what was she, a German singer
Model,
who was with model singer who was with the Velvet Underground in the '60s for a couple of years. Very obscure sort of stuff. I think there's also, who was the one that was married to Serge Gainsbourg? Jane Birkin, maybe? Jane Birkin. Anyway, very obscure music comes through this.
There's also Nick Drake. There's the music of Eric Satie. There's songs from the Charlie Brown Christmas special, which occur in a number of his movies.
Yes.
Which is really interesting to think of that as, first of all, Charlie Brown as, a children's character, a cartoon character who's depressed. That's the central feature of him. And that the music from the Charlie Brown Christmas special is really sad. It's some of the only sad Christmas music you'll ever find. And he uses it repeatedly. And then in the scene when Royal is taking his grandsons out pranking, the song that they play is Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard, Paul Simon, Another Four. A famous song, but at the same time, if you're going to have a joyful song, let's get a joyful song by a four. Because there's still even a note of sadness, even in Paul Simon's joy.
Yeah. Just back to the Charlie Brown music. It was the Vince Guaraldi Christmas music, the great jazz piano player who died a couple of years ago. But honestly, it's the only Christmas music I can listen to is that soundtrack, quite frankly. But it's one of my favorites. And Nick Drake, boy, a four-ish character there. Suicide, as he felt like a failure and was revitalized by a Volkswagen commercial that played his song Pink Moon that became ubiquitous 15, 20 years ago, but he was not around to enjoy his fame, unfortunately. So again, these themes of loss, heartbreak, lack of appreciation, but this tenderness underneath of it all.
In a comedy. Yeah, a lot of tragedy. There's another Forrest theme that shows up in this. I mean, we mentioned already Margot's missing finger is termed by an obscure singer-songwriter I'm a big fan of. He didn't originate the term, but he's got a song by this title, The Wound That Never Heals. This is a singer-songwriter called Jim White, who I believe is a four as well.
Oh, yeah.
And the notion of the wound that never heals, there's Margot's finger, there's a BB that's stuck in Chaz's knuckle from when his father shot him during just a family gameplay. And they were supposedly on the same team, and his father shot him and then laughed, and that BB was never extracted from his hand. And then there's Richie's unrequited love for his sister, which can never be consummated. And then there's Eli, the neighbor's lifelong wish that he was a Tenenbaum. So everybody's got some fundamental lack that is just there, which fours really go through life feeling like, I'm wounded in some way or I'm different in some way. In Tom Condon's book, The Enneagram Movie and Video Guide, he talks about a lot of movies featuring monsters or people who are malformed being representative of fours, whether it's Dracula or The Hunchback of Notre Dame or Cyrano de Bergerac. There's something fundamental about me that makes me different and, most crucially, unlovable. And this is just who I am, and that's how it's going to be.
A real quick Jim White thing was it made a documentary called Searching for the Wrong-Eyed Jesus, which was just wonderful. And again, just the title, right? Searching for the Wrong-Eyed Jesus. Holy cow, is that a great four title? Okay, but really good documentary if you can find it.
Are you interested in learning more about our approach to the Enneagram? Go to awareness-to-action.com and check out our certification program. We offer a clear, concise, business-friendly, and science-minded approach while maintaining the depth of traditional approaches to the system. At Awareness to Action International, we're the leading innovators in the theory and pragmatic applications of this system to all aspects of the work environment, including leadership and personal development, team building, diversity and culture, and managing change. However, this approach is not just for the business world. A lot of people who attend our trainings do so for their own self-development or spiritual growth. Our certification program is one of only a handful of curricula accredited as a school by the International Enneagram Association. It is currently being conducted virtually and combines live sessions with asynchronous learning. Again, find out more at awareness-to-action.com.
Okay, so Rushmore, if you haven't seen it,
Royal Tenenbaums.
I'm sorry, the Royal Tenenbaums. Yes, thank you. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, rush out to see it. I think it's just a wonderful, wonderful movie. And still very accessible. Again, very idiosyncratic, very stylized, but still very, very approachable and watchable as, kind of a mainstreamish sort of movie. Okay. Now, with our next movie, the Wes Anderson style is becoming more and more clear. Okay, it's becoming, I hate to say this, but almost standard, right? Which is the last thing a four would want to hear. But, again, you're seeing, here we go with Wes Anderson again. And I will say, much like your experience with the Royal Tenenbaums, the first time I attempted to watch Moonrise Kingdom, I wasn't in the right frame of mind. I watched about 20 minutes of it and just, turned it off and never went back to it until you suggested it for this podcast. And I really, really liked this movie. Okay. Tell us about Moonrise Kingdom, TJ.
So, Moonrise Kingdom came out in 2012. It debuted at the Cannes Film Festival. It was the opening film there. It takes place on the fictional island of New Penzance in the northeast of the United States, actually filmed in Rhode Island. It's an island with no cars. There's only one car. It's the police car. It takes place in 1965. So the two main characters are 12-year-olds. There's Sam, who's both an orphan and a cocky scout, which is a thinly veiled version of the Boy Scouts, but I can imagine the Boy Scouts of America didn't want their brand associated with this film.
And he wouldn't have used the Boy Scouts of America anyway. He had to create his own scout troop. So, yeah, exactly right. All right.
But they have the same aesthetic and same priorities as the Boy Scouts. We see their scoutmaster played by Edward Norton, and he's got his troop, and then there's one scout who's not there, and that is young Sam. And then when they look in his tent, they find that he has cut a hole in the side and left a map over the side and left a letter of resignation saying, I'm paraphrasing, but saying, I'm not wanted here, so I'm leaving. And then later when Edward Norton is calling his scoutmaster and calling the police and saying about this, he does refer to Sam as the least popular member of the group by far. It's very much a four-ish element, again, designed by a four of nobody likes me, it's just a fact.
And adopted.
Yeah. And not only is he adopted, but we find out pretty soon that even his foster parents don't want him. They just say that he's too much of a problem. When the police captain, played by Bruce Willis, calls them up to let him know that he's missing and that they're looking for him, they say, I'm sorry, but we can't invite him back. And they don't really specify why. And from what we see of him and what we see of Suzy, who we'll talk about in a second, they both have tempers, but they're not brutal. They're not pyromaniacs. They're not, they're not beating their siblings or anything like that.
They're a little weird, but they're not bad kids, right?
Yeah. It's like, what's so bad about this 12-year-old that even a foster family says, no thanks. We'd just rather not have him. So he leaves. And then we also meet young Suzy, a 12-year-old girl. She's the daughter of two lawyers played by Bill Murray and Frances McDormand. She has 3 siblings. And unsurprisingly, she's the odd one out. She's the only one who doesn't get along. And she and Sam, we find out later, have developed a correspondence and come up with a plan that we will run away and live together in the wilderness. So they do. They execute this plan successfully, and they meet up and they run away together. So they're pursued by the scoutmaster, Edward Norton, and the rest of the khaki scouts. And they're pursued by the local policeman, Bruce Willis, who's a very kind of sad and lonely policeman who's always listening to Hank Williams movies. They're eventually found. They do successfully get away for a while because Sam, for an unpopular scout, is a really good outdoorsman and is just really practical and very good at what he does. And they're eventually found. They're separated. Their parents are furious at what they've done. Bill Murray says that's the last conversation you will ever have. You will never see each other again. Yeah. And then the former scoutmates who had rejected Sam suddenly come together and feel sympathy for him and decide to break him out of prison and break Suzy out from her family and facilitate their running away. So they do. And they canoe them over to the big scout gathering, which is called the Hullabaloo, which I thought was a really funny variation on the actual term, which is a scout jamboree. And they're married by a character played by Jason Schwartzman, who's a scoutmaster, who's the cousin of one of the scouts, who marries them, even though he admits this is not a legal marriage in any way, shape, or form.
It's not recognized by the state or the church, right?
Or anyone, anywhere. But they immediately want to marry at 12. Yes. So they do. And in the meantime, the framing device of the whole show is a narration done by the actor Bob Balaban, a character actor who's been in many, many movies.
Yes.
And he talks directly to the camera.
Yes.
Initially, he gives you just the lowdown of what the island is, of what it comprises of, what it looks like, who the indigenous original occupants were. And then he lets you know, very much like you said before, like a Homeric omniscient narrator, that a massive storm will strike in 3 days' time.
Yeah. He's like a one-man Greek chorus, right?
And like a chorus, he does sometimes interact with the lead players,
yes,
including directing, the search party towards where Sam and Suzy are eventually found. So that storm does hit right as Sam and Suzy are escaping from the scout hullabaloo, and everybody hunkers down in the church, and Sam and Suzy climb to the spire of the church right as thunder and lightning and rain is pelting down and wind is blasting towards them, and they're ready to jump, possibly to their own deaths, when Bruce Willis's character reaches out to them and offers to adopt Sam, which will let him stay on the island. And the character of Social Services, we never find out her name, she's just Social Services, played by Tilda Swinton, shows up and is the looming authority figure who's going to take Sam off to live in what's implied to be a brutal orphanage. Allows this partially because of the intervention of the two lawyer characters who affirm that this would be legal, this would have legal standing, you'd better not mess with the legality of what we want to do. And he adopts Sam, keeps him on the island, and the two of them continue to have their love, but in secret, which is maybe a Four's version of a happily ever after. They're still 12. They're not officially together. He has to sneak into her house so they can be together and then sneak out. Nobody can know, but they love each other and they have this understanding.
Yeah. So a couple of things caught my attention about this movie. Number one, I just, again, great understated acting, a compelling story, very interesting visuals. Here, because they're on the island, Anderson has some space for some of the shots, right? And he uses it to great effect because rather than these sort of closed in, scenes that we're used to. In Royal Tenenbaums, there's literally scenes in a closet, right, that happen. But now he's got these big fields and the characters are far away from each other very often, and so, but then contrasting that with very tight scenes, intense and, so forth, right? So one of the things I noticed was how French this movie felt to me. Right. So there was a review I saw here that I want to kind of mention when I was doing a little research. And it said, the film is frequently funny, always elegant or mock elegant, and something that would make Humbert laugh all the way to his asylum. So Humbert is the, character in Lolita, right? The man who falls in love with the, 12-year-old girl. And to his downfall. So, and for me, there was a little bit of a creepiness in this relationship between the 12 years old. And I mentioned earlier about this, these things that wouldn't happen in today's mindset in films like this. The two of them, the 12-year-olds, kind of making out and talking about French kissing and that sort of thing, right? It was a little, it was very French, it felt to me, right? I mean, it reminded me of, the whole premise reminded me of Band of Outsiders, I think it was, of just this idea of escaping, right? This idea of getting away, of being alone. It also made me start thinking of how much the work of Jacques Demy must have influenced Wes Anderson. I'm not sure if you've ever seen The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, right? No. I started watching it again last night while I was doing something else. It's a musical from the 1960s where it's one of the few movies that I see and I say, oh, that's Wes Anderson, right? The color palette was just boom, right? And oddly enough, this morning I was doing a little research to see if there was a connection between the two of them, and a reviewer for the Hollywood Reporter reviewing Wes Anderson's new movie, which is called The French Dispatch, was saying Anderson has never said that he was, inspired by Jacques Demy, but his musicals are all over it. So you might want to check him out. The Umbrellas of Cherbourg is his most famous movie. So you see and hear Anderson is starting to turn his attention to other cultures in a way, right? We see this in the Grand Budapest Hotel and Isle of Dogs is in Japan and, that sort of thing. So there's a turn of direction here again toward the exotic. which is a very four-ish sort of thing. There are these things that are sophisticated. French film is very sophisticated that, way, supposedly. Let's see what else caught my attention here. Yeah. There's the scene when the storm is coming in, and this is the other thing, right? So this movie starts 3 days before a storm is about to come, the biggest storm in the century or something like that. And so they have to find these kids, not only because the kids have run off, but because there's this huge storm coming. And when the storm starts to hit, Bill Murray, who plays the girl's father, and Frances McDormand, who plays the mother, are lying in bed. And Bill Murray says, "I hope the roof flies off and sucks me into space." Okay? And Frances McDormand says to him, "Stop feeling sorry for yourself." And his response is, "Why?" And she says, talking about the kids, "We're all they've got." Right? And his response is, "That's not enough." Right? And that just broke my heart, right? Because you could see the sadness and desperation in this character. This father who's just trying to do right for his kids, not a great father by any stretch. And in fact, the one getting in the way of his daughter's true love. But you just see this pain in this character that, again, kind of hits you by surprise because the acting is so, I'll use the word carefully, but flat, right? I mean, it's purposely toned down on the affect in the acting. And it makes those moments all the more powerful, I think.
Yeah, it's a very subtle performance. It's a supporting role. It's definitely not a Bill Murray movie. And he's not doing anything that would make anybody think, "Oh, remember that moment when Bill Murray did that," in that funny way. But yeah, he's wonderful in it. Another moment that really jumped out for me is when we find out what Suzy has brought, what her supplies are as they run away. So at one point, they do an inventory of what she's brought with her. And for one thing, she's wearing a dress. And what a couple of characters refer to as Sunday shoes. So not necessarily practical for tromping through the woods. She's also wearing makeup, which I found out the actor had done herself. And she doesn't look like a little kid who's too young to be wearing makeup. I mean, she does look like a 12-year-old kid. But this is something my partner, Lindsay, actually experienced herself when she was, I think, maybe 9 or 10. Because a lot of women have the experience of the time that they got into their mother or their grandmother's makeup kit when nobody was watching, and then they put on makeup, but they probably overdid it in a really big way. What happened with Lindsay is she got into it and then put on the makeup. And then when her mother and grandmother found her, they realized, oh, she actually really knows what she's doing. Like right away, she was able to put on the kind of makeup that was like appropriate to her look. So there's that. She brought along a portable record player and a record of a French singer. So in the scene that you mentioned before, when they're making out, they're listening to a French song as they do it.
Yes.
She's brought along a suitcase of fantasy novels that she stole from the library. And the only reason she didn't bring all of her novels was because the suitcase was too heavy. She's brought her kitten in a carrying case and a cat and like 10 tins of cat food. And then finally she's brought a pamphlet that she found on the family refrigerator, which can't remember the phrasing completely, but the gist of it is how to deal with a difficult child. And this is something Wes Anderson found on his own family fridge when he was a youngster and knew immediately that it referred to himself. And when Suzy shows this to Sam, he laughs just a little bit and she immediately gets offended. And she goes into the tent and pouts and cries, and he comes in and apologizes. So again, it's a beautifully four-ish character. I think Suzy is one of the great fours in not only in Wes Anderson's body of work, but in film in general. Yeah. But just that sense of like, I'm broken, I'm flawed. And if somebody makes fun of me for that sense of that is going to hurt me more than anything, particularly if that comes from my beloved. Of even you don't understand me, even you don't get that my pain is real. How dare you? And of course, the roles on that are reversed when later there's a scene where they're camping on the beach and she expresses admiration for the fact that he's an orphan, saying that all of her favorite characters are orphans and that, your lives are more interesting. And he looks at her and he says, I love you, but you don't know what you're talking about. Right. And of course, the part that she responds to, she says, I love you too. But again, there's that sense from him of like, you don't know what it's actually like to be an orphan. You don't know what it's like to feel this particular pain. You feel like an orphan, but you actually have parents and siblings in a home. I don't. My parents died, and I'm in a foster home, and he doesn't know this at this point, but even his foster family doesn't want him. Yeah. And there's a tremendous bond, and we see this in a number of the things. I mean, in Rushmore, the first conversation that Max has with Miss Cross, it comes out that she's a widow and that that his mother died of cancer. There's this bond of shared sadness and tragedy. So that's very much a part of Suzy and Sam's relationship in this movie.
Yes. And at some point they show, I think it was in Rushmore, they show the tombstone of his mother. And it says, the pathos of glory led her to the grave. I mean, it's just like, oh. And there's also the scene, and you alluded to this, when in the Royal Tenenbaums, they go to visit Royal's mother, I think it is, and his son's dead wife is there also. And when the son says, I want to go visit, her grave, Royal says, oh, that's right, we have another body here. And he gives them half of the flowers that he brought. Oh, my. Okay. Yeah. So themes of abandonment abound in Wes Anderson's, either through lack of understanding, lack of appreciation, through fleeing, or through death.
And Royal Tenenbaums, one of the concluding moments is showing Royal's grave. He dies not too long after the events of the movie, and they give him the epitaph that he'd wanted, which is that he died saving his family from a destroyed, burning battleship. No basis in reality whatsoever, but pretty good sounding. Makes him sound really heroic and unique.
Are you interested in learning more about our approach to the Enneagram? Go to awareness-to-action.com and check out our certification program. We offer a clear, concise, business-friendly, and science-minded approach while maintaining the depth of traditional approaches to the system. At Awareness to Action International, we're the leading innovators in the theory and pragmatic applications of this system to all aspects of the work environment, including leadership and personal development, team building, diversity and culture, and managing change. However, this approach is not just for the business world. A lot of people who attend our trainings do so for their own self-development or spiritual growth. Our certification program is one of only a handful of curricula accredited as a school by the International Enneagram Association. It is currently being conducted virtually and combines live sessions with asynchronous learning. Again, find out more at awareness-to-action.com.
All right. So let's go to our final movie here, The Isle of Dogs. Again, this is not, I had not seen this movie. I have a flaw in my taste when it comes to animated movies. I think it's maybe watching too many of them when I had kids. And, I still have kids, but when my kids were younger and I went through a period where all I watched were animated movies, so I missed, some. So I had not seen this. But boy, oh boy, did I love it, right? I mean, for me, this was the highlight of this activity, because getting to watch this movie for the first time. And for me, let's see, well, I'll get into why I love it in a moment, but let me talk about it. So it was released in 2014. Very good reviews. We haven't talked about the reviews, but all of the movies that we've talked about have been very well reviewed on Rotten Tomatoes and others. And it was a pretty successful movie, too. I don't know what the budget was, but it made $64 million. So I think Rushmore broke even, made a little bit of money, perhaps. And, and again, some of those other movies became more successful. But it takes place in the future in a dystopian Japan. A virus spreads among dogs. It first starts off talking about how cats used to be the sort of favored animal in the kingdom. And then there was an uprising, cats were dominating. And then, the dogs and their advocates rose up and, they kind of kicked the cats out of the kingdom. And then dogs became the favored animals. But then this virus came up, and a lot of it was kind of manufactured. A lot of it was kind of blown out of proportion. And it was the mayor of the mega city who is conspiring to get rid of the dogs. They may have explained why. I didn't quite catch it, right? I'm not quite sure why they wanted to get rid of the dogs, whether it was an uprising of the cats or whatever. But a lot of it had to do with the desire to replace them with mechanical dogs, robot dogs, which was, could have been kind of a money-making activity as well, right? So they decide they're going to take these dogs and put them all on what to that point had been Garbage Island, right, where they put all the garbage. And so the dogs are left to survive. Now, there's a little boy who is the adopted son of the mayor. Okay. And TJ, did you catch exactly who the boy was and what his relationship to the mayor was? I kind of missed it when I was watching it.
Yeah, he was a nephew a few degrees removed. And the story was that his parents had died in a train crash. So again, you've got an orphan, you've got tragedy.
Yes.
Ticking all the boxes yet again.
Exactly right. Okay. And when he is adopted by the mayor, he is assigned a guard dog, right? This is before the dogs were banished, and he developed a very close relationship with the dog. They even had these little ear things that they could speak to each other in, right? So the dog could hear him and respond to his needs. When the dogs are banished, the little boy steals a plane, very reminiscent of the Little Prince in a way here, and crash lands on the island and goes in search of his dog, okay, who had, befriended other dogs eventually, right? I mean, he was locked in a cage, and at first he had heard that the other dogs were cannibal dogs and that they were going to eat him, but they find out that, the dogs are actually friendly. They all sort of band together. The boy lands, goes looking for his dog's spot, walks around for a big part of the movie with a piece of metal sticking out of his head from the plane crash, right? That he couldn't quite get out.
A wound that never heals. Yeah.
A wound that never heals, right? And the mayor sends his henchmen and the robot dogs to go find Atari, the little boy, and to kill all the dogs. Okay. But Atari eventually finds his dog. They, manage to defend themselves against the killer dogs. All the while, there are people searching, standing up for the dogs, searching for a cure, a vaccination that will counteract the virus. They can bring the dogs back. So they do eventually come back. They are all saved by the vaccination. Just a note, please go out and get vaccinated if you are not. But we'll set that aside for now. Okay, so I just lost half the listeners in the U.S. But
and good riddance to them.
Good riddance. Yeah, actually, I think our listeners are pro-vaccine. But anyway, so let's not digress. So they live happily ever after, but again, a movie tinged with loss and sadness, right? With darkness, very studied. Again, you see even more controlled because it's animated, right? So, it's almost as if this is Wes Anderson's dream stage, right? I get to actually draw it. The characters are stop motion characters, and so again, like I said before, you can see the hair movements and all this stuff, which adds kind of a heightened sense of aliveness to the dogs, right? And this is one of the things that struck me in this movie. It's this fight against the replacement of reality, of live, worthwhile creatures with soulless robots. Right, which is the Four's biggest fear, right? Of losing their individuality, their animus, in a sense, right, of who they are. So there was that theme. Now we see other themes through here, right? I mean, so we talked about sort of the French influences we saw earlier. This is very, very heavily influenced by Japanese culture, Japanese film. Kurosawa fingerprints are all over this movie. Hayao Miyazaki fingerprints are all over this movie. You see, lots of the aesthetic of the Japanese woodcuts are through this. Even I think some of the music, I'd have to go back and listen again, but I'm pretty sure that some of that music was lifted right out of The Seven Samurai.
It was. I mean, you're 100% right.
It was. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I was listening to certain scenes and I said, yeah, this is The Seven Samurai.
No coincidence.
Yeah, and so there's even kind of a Seven Samurai theme of this group banding together to fight, the enemy, kind of following the leader and, collecting these misfits along the way, as we see in the Seven Samurai. So for me, this movie, it was compelling emotionally, right? It was, a fun and interesting story, visually wonderful. I'm not somebody who will, value a movie only because of the aesthetic sense of it, right? I mean, it's got to have a good story. It's got to be compelling. It's got to move me in some way emotionally. This one did. The tenderness of the relationship between the boy and his dog was really quite affecting. And it's funny because it's almost a stereotype in storytelling, like the easiest story to tell, to manipulate people emotionally, is a story about a boy and his dog, right? That's kind of a cliche. And yet this worked, right? I mean, it was about this boy trying to find his dog, the dog's desire to be reunited, the dog's feeling of conflict between his love and affection for his owner, but his sense of responsibility to his fellow dogs, right? Let's see what else comes in here.
Well, part of that, too, is that it isn't simply like the relationship between the boy and the dog that he lost and he's searching for is briefly dealt with in the movie, because for the most of that movie, we don't see that dog. We eventually find him. But when he crash lands, the dogs that find him there, they all have names that imply they're an alpha dog. There's Rex, there's King, there's Boss. Yeah. And then the main dog, who he eventually bonds with, is called Chief, and that's voiced by the great actor Bryan Cranston. And Chief is all black, and he strongly identifies as a stray. And I think the Enneagram type of that character, again, probably is another 8. He's powerful. He's tough. He rejects the notion of having masters. He says, I don't sit. I don't fetch. He doesn't want love. He doesn't want a relationship. He wants independence and control.
Yes.
And one of the few times he was captured and adopted, he said he bit the hand of the boy who tried to pet him so hard that the hand almost had to be removed. Because that's just who he is. So,
and he couldn't explain why, right?
Yeah.
When they, why did you do that? He couldn't explain why he did it. Yeah.
So he's this big, tough, powerful dog. I don't want love. I don't want responsibility. I don't want a human master. And then just through chance circumstance, he and the boy get paired together as the rest of the dogs get separated. And then little by little, they start to grow close. And there's a scene when the boy bathes the dog, and it turns out he's not actually black. His fur is mostly white. It's just he was so dirty and so uncared for so long he didn't know. And then the boy gives him a treat called a puppy snap. It's a little dog biscuit. And Chief has never had one before. And as he bites it, he describes the taste of it and then immediately says, this is my new favorite food.
Yes.
And little by little comes to love him. And when they finally do reunite with the boy's original dog, Spots reveals that he does have this responsibility to the other dogs. And then he asks Chief, who turns out to be his littermate and youngest brother, if he will assume the responsibility of being Atari's dog and being loyal to him and protecting him. And there's this beautiful, tender moment where you see Chief, just his big, sensitive eyes, and he accepts this. And it's this moment of like, I've gone through my whole life rejecting love and connection, and now I'm opening. And there's a strong parallel to the Bruce Willis character in Moonlight Kingdom, in that we don't know too much about him as a character. It's hard to know what type he is, but he's a police officer, and he's a good one, and he's completely comfortable being in charge. But he's always listening to Hank Williams music, and it comes out in a conversation between him and Sam that he loved the woman, and the woman didn't love him back, and that's all you find out about him. But that's the moment where you really see, and again, this is another form of catnip for a 4, is like, oh, somebody's sadness, somebody's open, tender heart, no matter what type they are. But it's like, now I'm seeing the real person. Now I'm seeing the tragedy and the sensitivity and the love in your heart and the rejected love. Now I get you and you get me, and now we can really love each other. So that's Chief's journey as a character, and he's the main character of the movie, if there is one. It's the opening of the heart of this tough dog, this tough 8, who just eventually reveals, as I'm sure you can speak to this, that 8s, for all their power and toughness, are actually very sensitive. And if you get close to an 8, you'll find out just how loving and tender that they are. But they don't show it to everybody. When they do, it's a big deal.
Right. So for an 8, just to touch on that topic, showing that is an investment in the other person, and they invest very carefully, because once you are part of my world, I am responsible for you. It's that old, thing about, in some cultures, if you save somebody's life, then you have to take care of them, right, from there on out. And 8s sort of think that way, right? So if I let you in, then anytime there's a problem for you, I'm going to be the one there for it. And, I can't give that out lightly. So there is this element, and it's not, a lot of people think eights are afraid of being vulnerable and all this sort of stuff. And I'm not going to get into that debate, but a lot of eights won't really resonate with that. It's this awareness of the need to be strong very often because other people are expecting you to be strong for them. Right. And so I only share that, carefully. And if I expose the vulnerability, it means that I have to now, take responsibility for you. Okay?
Right to the end.
Yes. Right. So it's interesting, again, when, they clean off Chief and find out that he is actually a white dog with spots, kind of like the Dalmatian mice from the Royal Tenenbaums, right? Which, kept walking through the movie every so often. Okay. And so other things here, again, I mentioned before about the storytelling and meta storytelling here, and it happens through interpreters periodically, not all the time, because most of the dialogue between people is in Japanese, right? The dogs speak English, the humans speak Japanese, except for the occasional translator, who is usually either an interpreter for some formal meeting or a broadcaster of some sort, who is kind of giving you the story again. So it's a fourth storytelling device that we see in the four movies that we've talked about so far today. Okay.
There's also just a backstory given by one of the dogs, voiced by F. Murray Abraham, at the top of the movie. So he tells the story of the relationship between dogs and cats in Japan and how they were eventually rejected just because of the preference of the ruling family at the time. And he's looking right at the camera as he's telling you this story. It's not just voiceover. It is a puppet of a dog whose mouth is moving, telling you this.
Yes.
And then some of the soundtrack music, too. There's taiko drumming, and we see stop motion figures of taiko drummers drumming. And a detail that I noticed is that you can see a basketball hoop in the background of where the taiko drummers are, as if he set this in a high school gymnasium for no particular reason.
Oh, interesting.
He didn't have to. He constructed it, but he gave them a real place to be, just because.
Oh, man. All right. So other things, again, that we see through here is the mannered and very detailed backgrounds. Still, we see a lot of the centering frames, right? Where, when the dogs are talking or people are talking, they're right flat in the middle of a frame. Again, that's sort of a flat background that we see drawing you in. And, I've only been to Japan once, and I think I was there for about 36 hours. And I would never say that any culture is, all one type or another. But there's a whole lot of four going on in Japanese culture in a lot of ways, right? So with the aesthetic of wabi-sabi and shibumi and, some of the other Japanese, kind of the Zen aesthetic is very fourish for me. For me, Japanese culture is about as foreign to my mindset as we could be. I'm fascinated by Japanese culture, Japanese philosophy, Japanese aesthetics, but culturally, it's just a really, 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 really different place. Right. So again, the perfect place for a four from the United States to make a movie is in Japan, right? As we saw with Lost in Translation.
Something Russ Hudson said once, specifically referring to navigating fours or social fours in his terminology, is that they're very often expats.
Yes.
If I'm conspicuously the foreigner in the country where I am, then I'm just different right away. All you have to do is glance at me to know that. And if you're a four, that's a good thing.
Yes.
Particularly if I'm not a crass tourist. But if I'm walking through this as someone with taste and aesthetic sense of like, I'm gonna see the good things. I'm gonna partake in the good things.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So I would go even further and say that navigating fours are expats in their own homes very often, right? Again, it gets this fourish thing of I don't belong here. But one of the things I find with navigating fours is that I don't belong here and I don't want to be here. I'm going to go see what else is out there. In the world. So whereas the preserving four loves their home, loves their environment, that takes refuge in it, the navigating four almost wants to get away, right? In the way that you're describing. So, all right. So 4 movies about the Type Four. Something else about the Isle of Dogs?
One more thing I want to say about Isle of Dogs is that the big 4 theme that I found in this movie is there's how much beauty there is in the rejected. So the dogs are exiled to an island of garbage, which you'd think would be the least beautiful and appealing place there is. But the way it's arranged, because it's a stop motion film, so they can arrange whatever they want, and the way it's filmed, there's incredible beauty because this island doesn't just have garbage, but even the parts that are garbage are quite beautiful. There's one scene where they're in a cavern of colored bottles that are all the colors of the rainbow. It's a real feast for the eyes. There's other scenes where you can see the ruins of industrial works and of a theme park in the background. And as a four, one of my predilections, and I've talked about this in one of my monologues on stage, I love seeing photos that are shared online of abandoned, derelict hotels and theme parks and shopping malls. There's such beauty in the destruction of it. And I once did a road trip from Southern Illinois to Arkansas on a minor highway. So it wasn't an interstate. You could actually see where people lived. And I kept seeing collapsed trailer homes. And every time I would go by, I was in the passenger seat, my eyes would just be glued to the window of like, look at that. That's beautiful. Nobody else thinks that it's beautiful, but I do. So there's that with the island itself, and there's that with the dogs themselves, because the dogs are rejected. They're the despised group, and they're presented to us as main characters, as individuals. Each of the dogs in the main group of dogs that accompanies Atari on his quest, they each have their own backstory. They each have their own personality. There's a conversation about what their favorite foods are. They have they're not uniform dogs by any means. And then they're scared, as you mentioned, of the original indigenous inhabitants of this island, which are said to be cannibals. But when we find them, we find out, so those dogs are the rejected of the rejected, these supposed cannibal dogs. And when we meet them, their leader, voiced by Harvey Keitel, tells the story of who they really are, which is that they were experimented on. They were lab dogs. So many of them are malformed in some way. They might be missing a limb or missing an eye, or they've got scars on them or missing patches of fur, and they're diseased. And that they did have to eat one dog. They put him out of his misery, and that they howl with anguish as they mention that they're so sad at having had to do that. And of course, they're starving. They're just getting by, and they save the main characters. They don't eat them. They don't attack them. They don't bother them at all. They bring them in and they help them, as if to say there's not only beauty in the rejected, but there's beauty in the rejected of the rejected, and there's integrity in them too. We're the misfits, and we will accept anyone who's rejected, anyone who's despised, anyone who's cursed and unwanted. We get it. So come and live with us.
Yes. The story of the cannibalism that they talked about, it was emotionally moving, right? Sad. You could feel the howling. You could feel a part of yourself howling inside. I was immediately placed into that position, right? And again, it came out of nowhere, almost emotionally, right? Because you're watching this movie, and okay, it's interesting. I am kind of caught in the aesthetics, the construction of the movie. You feel almost a slight emotional detachment from it, and then all of a sudden, bam! You get hit right in the heart with something, right? Which happens in all of these movies, right? All of these movies, that you're expecting this to be, okay, I'm not being touched here. These are, not emotional characters. And then boom, right? You get it right in the chest. So very, very touching stuff. All right, great. So again, 4 movies about Type 4, Wes Anderson. Highly, highly recommend these movies. I have not seen all of Wes Anderson's movies. The ones I have seen, I've really, really liked. And this has inspired me to go and pick up watch some of the ones that I haven't seen yet. So thank you. TJ, you suggested Wes Anderson for Type 4. Really, really good call. And so any other closing comments you would make, TJ?
Yeah, I would highly recommend watching The Grand Budapest Hotel. I think he takes it even further than in Moonrise Kingdom in terms of his creating the environment, manipulating the environment, painting it in vivid colors. The main character in that, played by Ralph Fiennes, is a hotel concierge, and I'm pretty sure he's a 4 who just wants everything to be exactly up to his very high standards. And then Bottle Rocket. We mentioned Bottle Rocket before.
Yes.
When I reached out to that friend who knew Wes Anderson personally, I asked him, again, not trying to lead him to any given place, which character from any of his movies he thought was most like the actual Wes Anderson. And again, here's his answer. He says, he's like Owen Wilson's character from Bottle Rocket if that character also had Luke Wilson's character's overarching kindness, quietness and gentle way of moving through the world.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
that movie is wonderful to watch, and you can see the seeds of many of his ideas and aesthetics that then played out through the rest of his career. And you can also watch the original short. That's on YouTube. The original 12-minute black and white bottle rocket is available to watch. So you can see a very young Owen and Luke Wilson in that. And the very young sensibilities of Wes Anderson just playing and discovering. And I love his stuff. Can't recommend it highly enough.
Yeah. Great. So we'll have a lot of these references in the show notes. There were some really good things I found talking about Wes Anderson and his aesthetic online that'll be in the show notes. And we'll be sure to add those other movies as other references. So TJ, thanks again for the conversation. This was fun, and we covered a whole lot of ground here. We talked an awful lot about Type 4. Join us next time for the Enneagram in a Movie podcast. Thanks, TJ.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to be a part of this.
You've been listening to the Enneagram in a Movie podcast, which is produced and edited by Seth Creekmore and is part of the Awareness to Action podcast network. Don't forget to go online and support the podcast by taking a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. See you next time.